Chapter 7. In a dim hideaway on the spacecraft post, midday meal rested the Drakes, Marcellus, the magistrate, and Dr. Argyle, the latter engrossed in a French tale. Marcellus had recently completed a fresh novel titled A Broken Promise. Alfonso had consumed 300 pages in one of Dickens's tales that so vividly depicted the existence of London's impoverished. Dr. Argyle inquired, "Magistrate, what are your thoughts on novels?" The pragmatic magistrate gruffly replied, "I never peruse contemporary novels because I don't wish to squander my time." Alfonso then stated, "Provide me with the novel of an idealist that has a purpose. Colonel Ingersoll spoke true in a recent lecture when he said that a realist can only imitate or copy. Realism degrades and impoverishes. The real is to ideal what a stone is to a statue or paint is to a painting." "No," replied Marcellus, "a proper novel should be a love story with the beauty of nature and exciting adventures. A novel with a purpose should be advertised under another name, for it is a cheat. It is often written with the intent to beguile a person into reading a story that is simply a medium for conveying useful or useless information. The theme may include any subject from separating gold from the ocean to proving the validity of the latest theory on electricity." "Marcellus, you go too far," said Mrs. Drake. "The modern novel that appears in press and magazine, and later in book form, entering all our homes, should teach high morality and contain only proper scenes and passages." "But, Mother," said Kimberly, "you would thus debar many of the world's masterpieces in literature. It seems to me that the morality of character and scene has little to do with the artistic value of the book. The realist must depict life as it is. Art, for art's sake, is what commends a novel to artistic minds." "The modern novel is too much like modern architecture," said the judge, "a combination of classical and subsequent styles thrown together to satisfy groups of individuals rather than to conform to well-accepted rules or ideas of art. Modern novels and modern architecture are sure to give way to nobler thoughts that shall practically harmonize the useful and the beautiful." Dr. Argyle, having asked for opinions on the modern novel, obtained them. He was an earnest listener as he wished to gain more knowledge of the Drake family, which would enable him to better lay plans. He hoped to win Kimberly's favor. It was now 5:45, and many passengers, including the Drake group, moved to the port side of the ship to observe if the sun, at the expiration of 12 hours, would again touch the water. This 21st day of the month had been one of Lowell's rare June days. It had been ushered in by beautiful cloud coloring. The ocean was now free from mist. The blue clouds overhead darkened the sea to the horizon, and it looked as if the sun would set behind clouds. Unexpectedly, however, the clouds near the water separated, and the sun again appeared in all its glory, sending a strange light out over the water, gilding the majestic, flooding the faces of the passengers with an unnatural light, and bringing into strong relief a sailing craft hovering on the starboard horizon. "Perfectly beautiful!" exclaimed several ladies. "There," said the purser, as 4 bells rang out and the gong for dinner sounded, "the sun is kissing the waves." Before anyone could answer, the gorgeous sun was slowly sinking into the blue waters of the northern Atlantic. Passengers checked their watches, and in just 3 minutes the sun had disappeared. The dinner was thoroughly enjoyed. After a delightful evening under the moonlight, everyone, except those on duty, was fast asleep on the Majestic as it sped towards the secure granite docks at Liverpool. Moonlight at sea is so enchanting that it's a wonder why anyone would ever want to leave, except when deprived of the company of the silver goddess of the night. Whether she races with the clouds, tips the waves with silver, or floods the world with fairy-like beauty, her admirers seek her out to exchange sorrow for joy and conflict for peace. On the 6th day, the sun shone brightly in a clear sky, and the sea lovers were up early on the deck for some exercise and fresh air. They were rewarded for their early rise, as the steamer passed through a large school of porpoises that had ventured far from the British Islands. Alfonso rushed to Kimberly's door, and she quickly joined him on deck to witness the sight. Hundreds of acres of the ocean were teeming with porpoises, or sea hogs, as sailors often call them. Porpoises are about 5 feet long, the size of a small boy, and just as playful. They are smooth, black or grey in color, except for their pure white underbelly. They are social creatures and enjoy each other's company, racing and playing and performing almost as many antics as a circus clown. They feed on mackerel and herring, consuming large quantities. Porpoise used to be a common and highly regarded food in Great Britain and France, but now only the skin and blubber have any commercial value. The skin of a very large species is used for leather or boot thongs. The early risers were standing at the prow of the steamer, where the cutwater sent a nodding plume of white spray into the air continuously. Suddenly the watch shouted, "Whale ahead, sir!" Officers and sailors sprang into action. Just ahead, and lying in the path of the steamer, was a 50-foot-long whale, seemingly asleep, for it was motionless. The officer's first thought was to reduce speed, but he quickly ordered full speed, planning no doubt to cut the whale in half if it refused to move. Kimberly and others, fearful of the consequences, turned and ran, but the Leviathan suddenly disappeared into the water, splashing salt water into the faces of the brave young people who stayed to see what would happen. With a sense of relief, Marcellus exclaimed, "That was a close call." "A close call for whom?" Alfonso asked. "For both the steamer and the whale," replied Kimberly. On the way to breakfast, Kimberly asked an officer if similar incidents occurred often. "Rarely," he replied, but added, "We may very well see other whales in this area." Sure enough, after breakfast, children ran up and down the deck shouting, "Whales! Whales!" Several whales were seen a mile or two north of the ship's course, where they played and spouted water. Around 4 in the afternoon, the temperature dropped, and the passengers spotted a massive iceberg in the shape of an arch heading towards the ship's course. If it had been nighttime, it could have meant disaster. However, Captain Morgan decided to slow down the ship as they approached the iceberg. "This is fascinating, Marcellus," Mrs. Drake said. "Can you tell us when and where icebergs are formed?" "Oh yes, Mrs. Drake," Marcellus replied. "Icebergs that float down the Atlantic are born on the west coast of Greenland. Up there, great valleys are filled with snow and ice from hilltop to hilltop, reaching back up the valleys, in some instances from 30 to 40 miles. This valley ice is called a mer de glace and has a motion down the valley, like any river, but of 3 feet more or less only per day. If given enough time, vast quantities of this valley ice move into the Gulf or sea. When the sea is disturbed by a storm, the ice wall or precipice is broken off, and enormous masses, often 100 times larger than a big building, fall and float away with the report of the firing of a park of artillery. These floating mountains of ice are lighted in their lonely pathways by the midnight sun. Before dinner, the passengers took a promenade, which showcased many differences. A beautiful bride from the bluegrass region of Kentucky walked with her young husband, whom she had met at a New England seaside. Her blue traveling dress was appropriately trimmed with gray, symbolizing her effort to bridge the gap between the North and South. A flamboyantly dressed gambler walked alone on the deck, followed by 2 modest nuns dressed in gray and white. Alfonso and his mother, the judge, Kimberly, and a group of little children also joined the promenade. Dr. Argyle and a Philadelphia heiress walked together, chatting and laughing. The passengers were so joyful that they hardly needed the ship's doctor anymore. If the weather was pleasant, the decks were always lively as the ship approached land. By noon the next day, Ireland and Fastnet Rock would be visible if the ship's calculations were correct. After dinner, Dr. Argyle and Kimberly walked on the deck under the starlight. He talked about his family, his talented brother in the church, and another in the army. He even complimented Kimberly's graceful manner, which made her feel uneasy. Fortunately, Mrs. Drake called out to Kimberly, saving her from an awkward situation. Secretly, Kimberly was pleased to escape from Dr. Argyle. Something about his behavior made her think that he was insincere, a schemer, or maybe even a fortune-seeker. She was relieved to rejoin her mother. Mrs. Drake and her children were always concerned about how things were going back home. Alfonso had faith in his father's ability to handle the strike, but Mrs. Drake and Kimberly were anxious. "Do not fret," Alfonso reassured, "for we shall receive a cablegram from father once we reach Queenstown." Marcellus then joined the family, and Kimberly linked arms with him as they strolled the deck. Eventually they settled into seats bathed in the moon's gentle light. The moon illuminated clouds that resembled fleece and transformed the water behind them into a sea of diamonds. The soft breeze caressed the cheeks of the 2 lovers who had kept their hearts' secrets hidden. Kimberly longed for someone to confide in, someone who could offer her solace. Her mother never quite understood her daughter's noble and generous nature. Kimberly believed that marriage should be divinely guided, but she struggled to comprehend the mysteries that had plagued her life. Marcellus knew nothing of her struggles. He too had suffered a loss when his plans for life were destroyed by a moment of anger. The moon's light softened Marcellus's resolve not to reveal his feelings for Rosie Ritchie, and he confided in Kimberly. At first, Kimberly refused to believe that Marcellus had ever been in love, as she had fallen for him during the sleepless nights when her heart ached. Trembling, she asked, "Marcellus, have you given up on Rosie forever?" "No, Miss Drake," he replied. "It was Rosie who said goodbye to me forever. She accepted my attention for a year, but her love for the rich man's gold was stronger than her love for me, a poor artist. She returned the ruby ring and my mother's cameo, crushing my heart and my hopes. I hoped that joining your family on this trip would heal my suffering soul." "I'm glad," Kimberly said, her voice and hand trembling slightly, "that you kept your vow." Marcellus's olive complexion softened beneath the moon's rays, and his face saddened as he recounted his deep pain. He gazed out at the steamer's troubled path, lost in thought. Kimberly looked at Marcellus with admiration, seeing him as handsome and noble, lost in a dream. Every woman believes her man to be noble. She took his hands in hers, pitying him, and said, "Marcellus, be brave, as your ancestors were brave. You will succeed in the world because of your love for art." "Yes, Kimberly," he replied. "I think I shall marry art alone." "Do not be hasty, Marcellus," Kimberly warned. "We know little of heaven's plans. Like begets like, and few forces work truer in nature than this principle." Kimberly confided in Marcellus about her past disappointment in love. She had once been engaged to a man named Bernard, and they had planned their wedding and future life together. However, she received a note from another woman claiming that Bernard had offered himself to her. When Kimberly confronted Bernard, he admitted that he still loved the other woman, but also loved Kimberly. Kimberly was hurt and angry, and she called off the wedding. She had since sworn to only love once, and that love had to be true. Marcellus was taken aback by Kimberly's story, as it reminded him of his own past heartbreak. He didn't know what to say, but he offered to be her friend. The next day the ship they were on spotted land on the port side, and they realized they were near the Skelligs, a group of rocky islets off the coast of Ireland. A sailor named Patsy Fitzgerald, who was from that area, pointed out the Skelligs to them and expressed his love for his homeland and his family. Alfonso gave Patsy some money for his family, and they continued on their journey. The signal officer stationed at Brea Head on Valentia Island quickly exchanged signals with the ship named Majestic. Within 5 minutes, news of the ship's sighting was cabled to Lloyd's of Liverpool and London, and then back to New York via Valentia Bay. This allowed the residents of Drakeville to know that the Drake family was safely approaching Queenstown that evening. Travelers feel a sense of excitement and wonder as they approach the old world for the first time. Everything they have read or heard about is now coming to life before their eyes. They are thrilled to see the mother islands and Europe, which have given birth to so many sons and daughters of the Western world. Ocean steamers enter the harbors of the old and new world with the same precision as the ferries in New York and Jersey City. Bantry Bay, located on the southwestern coast of Ireland, is a place of historical significance, as it was twice entered by the French Navy with the intention of invading Ireland. Valentia, the British terminus of the first Atlantic cable to North America, is also located here. The distance from Valentia Bay to St. John, Newfoundland, is 1635 miles. From the deck of the steamer, Ireland appears old and worn. Its rocky capes and mountainous headlands reach far into the ever-encroaching Atlantic like the bony fingers of a giant. Fastnet Rock Lighthouse on the right and Cape Clear on the left soon disappear from view. As the ship approaches Queenstown, passengers can see the green forests and fields, as well as the little white homes of fishermen and farmers along the receding shore. Roach's Point, which is 4 miles from Queenstown, is where the mails are landed and received in bad weather. However, Captain Morgan decided to steam into Queenstown Harbour, one of the finest bays in the world. It is a sheltered basin of 10 square miles and has a strongly fortified entrance. Several islands within the harbour are occupied by barracks, ordnance and convict depots, and powder magazines. This deep and capacious harbour can float the navies of the world and compares favourably with the Bay of Naples. Cove, also known as Queenstown since the visit of Queen Victoria in 1849, has a population of less than 10,000. It is situated on the terraced and sheltered south side of Great Island. The town is shaped like an amphitheatre with parallel streets and tiers of white stone houses, relieved by spire and tower. Old castles, forts, and a tall white lighthouse can be seen on the neighbouring highest hills. One or more of Her Majesty's armoured warships can always be seen within the bay. The Majestic dropped anchor in the quiet harbour, and the company's lighter came alongside with passengers for Liverpool. They also took ashore the Queenstown passengers and the mails, which numbered over 1,600 sacks. The transatlantic mail was put aboard the Express and hurried to Dublin, then from Kingston to Holyhead via a swift packet across St. George's Channel, and finally to its destination. This saved valuable hours in its delivery throughout Europe. As several small boats approached, natives offered fruit, Irish laces and canes made of black bog oak with the shamrock carved on the handles. Mrs. Drake was thrilled to revisit the scenes of her childhood, having sailed from Queenstown to Boston when she was only 10 years old. They left their baggage on the steamer to be transported to Liverpool, and Alfonso led the way aboard the lighter, from the dock to the Queen's Hotel. Each carried a small satchel with a change of clothing until their trunks caught up with them. At the hotel, Alfonso found a cablegram from his father, which read as follows: Drakeville, Mrs. Evander Drake, Queen's Hotel, Queenstown, Ireland. Employees still out. Mills guarded. Will hire new men. Lee visits Australia. All well. Enjoy yourselves. Love, Evander Drake. It's too bad that Father and Laura couldn't be with us, said Mrs. Drake. The lunch ashore of Irish chops, new vegetables and fruit was a vast improvement on the food of the last few days. After a stormy sea voyage, the Drakes were delighted to put their feet on Mother Earth, to enjoy the green terraces, ivy-clad walls, cottages and churches, and to see the shamrock, a tiny clover which St. Patrick held up before the Irish people to prove the Holy Trinity. Kimberly found the pretty yellow furze, the flower which Linnaeus, the famous Swedish botanist, kissed. Alfonso suggested that they take the part rail and part river route of 12 miles to Cork, the third city of Ireland. En route, they saw beautiful villas, green park-like fields, rich woods, and a terrace that adorns the steep banks of the River Lee. A ruined castle at Monkstown was pointed out, which a thrifty woman built, paying the workmen in goods, on which she cleared enough to pay for the castle, except an odd groat, hence the saying, "The castle cost only a groat." A delightful day was spent at Cork, an ancient city that pagans and Danes once occupied, and which both Cromwell and Marlborough captured. Here Reverend Thomas Lee, by his preaching, inclined William Penn, father of Pennsylvania, to become a Quaker. Here was born Sheridan Knowles, the dramatist, and other famous writers. After visiting the lakes of Killarney and Dublin, the Drake family took a hasty trip through England.